Hi, this is Jerry. Today I want to share news about Gemini 3. When Google first announced Gemini as the successor to its Palm line, the message was clear. The company wanted to prove it could still set the pace in artificial intelligence. With Gemini 3, that ambition is explicit. Google is calling it its most intelligent model yet, and is rolling it straight into its core products: Search, the Gemini app, Workspace, and Enterprise APIs from day one. Unlike earlier launches where models appeared in limited developer previews, Gemini 3 is being treated as production infrastructure. It now powers Google's new AI mode in Search, turning traditional query and link results into what the company describes as a thought partner that can reason through complex questions, synthesize sources, and handle rich interactive responses. At the same time, Google is positioning Gemini 3 as a platform for agents, code writing assistants, workflow orchestrators, and autonomous tools. Its new Antigravity IDE, for instance, is built around Gemini 3 Pro and enables multiple AI agents to write code, interact with the terminal and browser, and produce artifacts documenting what they've done. So, what exactly is new in Gemini 3, and how does it compare with the rest of the frontier model landscape? Now, let's discuss its core capabilities to check whether Gemini 3 is breakthrough or just a marketing stunt. We will discuss three key capabilities for AI model. Firstly, let's check its multimodality level. Gemini 3 continues Google's push to make multimodality, text, images, audio, and in some cases video, feel native rather than bolted on. Gemini 3 Pro can ingest combined text and image prompts, think, screenshots, diagrams, photographed documents, and respond with not just text, but tables, visuals, and interactive UI elements in what Google calls generative interfaces. Compared with earlier Gemini releases and competitors like GPT 5.1, this is less about raw capability. Most frontier models now support multimodal inputs, and more about integration and speed. One benchmark comparison from Skyworks testing found that for multimodal tasks requiring multiple tools, Gemini 3 produced complete outputs about 40% faster than workflows pieced together from GPT 5.1 plus image tools. Secondly, we should look at its reasoning capability. Google is emphasizing reasoning as the headline improvement. The company claims Gemini 3 Pro sets a new bar across a range of public benchmarks and introduces a deep think mode designed for multi-step problem solving akin to running a long chain of thought in the background. Independent testers echo that sentiment. Ethan Mollick, who has been publicly comparing models for several years, describes Gemini 3 as very good, particularly at complex, multi-stage tasks that were challenging just 3 years ago. The key here isn't that Gemini 3 is the first to offer deeper reasoning. OpenAI's O-Series and GPT 5.1, Anthropic's Claude Sonnet 4.5, and others all have analogous modes. But that Google is folding this into everyday products like Search and Workspace instead of keeping it as a niche, developer-only capability. Thirdly, we should look at its application value on agentic behavior. Where Gemini 3 really tries to differentiate itself is in agentic behavior, the ability to break a goal into steps, call tools, and take actions on a user's behalf. Google describes Gemini 3 as a major leap forward for agentic AI, highlighting that it follows complex instructions with minimal prompt tuning and reliably calls tools. The anti-gravity coding environment is an example of this in practice. Multiple Gemini-powered agents can coordinate to edit files, run tests, browse documentation, and leave structured artifacts so the human can audit what happened. OpenAI and Anthropic are pushing in the same direction with GPT 5.1-based agents and Claude's tool use APIs. But Google's strategy is to make agents first-class citizens inside its ecosystem: Search, Gmail, Docs, Android, cloud. If that integration is smooth and cost-effective, it gives Gemini 3 a powerful structural advantage. Second part. Let's see the comparison between Gemini 3 and other AI models. Google claims that Gemini 3 Pro is state-of-the-art across a wide set of benchmarks, including widely watched suites like MMLU, Big Bench, code benchmarks, and multimodal evaluation sets, and that it tops the LM Arena leaderboard. External commentary is somewhat more cautious. Analysts point out that benchmark differences between the very top models are often small and sensitive to prompting details. One detailed write-up argues that while Gemini 3 looks better than GPT 5.1 and Claude Sonnet 4.5 on paper, benchmark spreads are noisy and shouldn't be overinterpreted. Still, there are some consistent themes emerging from early tests and comparisons. For text and reasoning, GPT-5 is often described as the most versatile all-rounder with extremely strong contextual depth. But reviewers note that Gemini has closed much of the gap and sometimes outperforms GPT-5 in search augment reasoning and structured answers. For multimodal tasks, Gemini 3 appears particularly strong in tasks that combine text, images, web context, and it often does so faster than pipelines that stitch separate tools together. For coding, independent comparisons earlier in 2025 suggested Claude had an edge in raw coding quality, with Gemini being more cost-effective and fast. With Gemini 3 and Antigravity, Google is clearly trying to narrow that gap by giving the model better tools and workflows rather than relying solely on model weights. In short, Gemini 3 is firmly in the top tier of models globally. Whether it is the best depends heavily on the task, but the days when Google's models were clearly a generation behind are over. Third part, let's look at its safety, governance, and frontier model risk. A notable element of the Gemini 3 launch is the publication of a Frontier Safety Framework report, specifically for Gemini 3 Pro. Google outlines how it regularly evaluates frontier models against defined capability and risk thresholds, critical capability levels, and applies heightened mitigations when needed. The FSF process includes domain-specific risk assessments, red teaming and external expert input, structured escalation if models approach predefined thresholds. Compared with peers, Anthropic has long branded itself around safety and constitutional constraints, while OpenAI has moved toward more formal risk frameworks in its post-GPT 4.1 communications. Gemini 3's FSF is Google's attempt to show regulators and enterprise customers that it too has a systematic approach rather than ad hoc guardrails. In practice, the user experience will be the real test. Does Gemini 3 manage to be useful without being overly censored? And can it avoid the kinds of high-profile failures, hallucinations, jailbreaks, harmful outputs that plagued earlier models? All these questions are still unknown, so we need to wait for further feedback from users. Fourthly, let's look at its product strategy. Whether Gemini 3 is a great integration versus standalone chatbot, perhaps the most important strategic difference between Gemini 3 and competitors is where the model shows up. For the first time, a Gemini model is being embedded into Google Search at launch via a new AI mode that can handle long, complex questions and respond with dynamic visual layouts, interactive tools, and simulations. That's a huge distribution advantage. Search's AI features already see over 2 billion users per month, compared to around 650 million for the standalone Gemini app. OpenAI's approach has been more focused on ChatGPT as a destination and embedding models via API into partner products like Microsoft's Copilot. Gemini 3 gives Google an opportunity to reclaim time spent and user mindshare inside its own properties, rather than let chat interfaces live elsewhere. Finally, let's get a close look. how Gemini 3 compares to other major models compared with GPT 5.1. GPT 5.1 is widely regarded as the most balanced all-round model for depth, reliability, and versatility. Benchmarks and early reviews suggest that Gemini 3 is at least competitive, and in some workflows, particularly search-augmented, multimodal, and agentic tasks, may be faster or more efficient. GPT 5.1, however, still enjoys a strong lead in ecosystem and mindshare. Countless plugins, third-party tools, and pre-existing workflows are built around GPT-style API. For developers heavily invested in those patterns, Gemini 3 would need to deliver either a clear capability or cost advantage to justify a switch. Compared with Claude Sonnet 4.5, Claude's brand remains deep, careful, principled reasoning with an emphasis on safety and long context work, research, legal, complex documents. Gemini 3's deep think and long context. Gemma variants are direct answers to that positioning, and on paper, Gemini 3's context, length, and multimodal reasoning match or exceed Claude's in several tests. Where Claude still often shines is writing nuance and code quality, especially in open-ended creative tasks and complex code generation. Earlier comparisons found Claude building more polished apps, while Gemini delivered fast, cost-effective results. Compared with Llama and other open-weight models, Meta's Llama 3 and other open-source models remain compelling for on-premise deployments, custom fine-tuning, and jurisdictions where data locality is essential. Gemini 3 is not open-weight, so it competes more as a cloud intelligence service than as a downloadable model. After previous analysis, we can make a basic conclusion. This time, Gemini 3 is a real contender, not just a catch-up play. Gemini 3 marks a turning point for Google's AI strategy. It is no longer a tentative, slightly late response to GPT-4 era models. Instead, it is a frontline system, powering search, enabling agentic workflows, and competing directly with GPT 5.1 and Claude at the very top of the market. On capabilities, the model appears firmly in the first tier of global AI systems, with particular strengths in multimodal reasoning, search-augmented tasks, and tightly integrated agents. On strategy, its deep embedding into Google's products, plus the complementary open Gemma 3 line, gives Google a distinctive position versus an increasingly crowded field. Whether Gemini 3 ends up being the dominant model of 2025 will depend less on a few benchmark points and more on real-world experience, cost, reliability, integration, and trust. But one thing is clear, the era when Google AI was a step behind the leaders is over. With Gemini 3, it has re-entered the race as a genuine frontrunner, and in some domains, the one to beat.